Hello, my name is Tina from Victoria Designs, and in this video Alexandra will explain how to create a journal with the printables of the Butterfly Beauty Kit. This journal will fit perfectly into the journal station from the other video. If you didn't see the previous video about how to make the journal station, where I explain everything about these new printables, I recommend seeing that one first, or at least my introduction. Unlike the journal station tutorial, which was explained thoroughly, this tutorial goes rather quickly and not all the steps are fully explained from A to Z. So it's best to have some experience already making journals. Alexandra used these same techniques in another tutorial as well, but slower and more fully explained. I will put a link below so that you can check that out later if necessary. I'm extremely enthusiastic about this whole beautiful kit. With the videos that are released today, you already know how to make the journal station and the first journal to put in there. The other tutorials for the journals that will go in this station as well will be released in the next month with matching nature-themed kits. If you like to make this journal with the printables that Alexandra used, there's a link in the description to have some more information about these. And now have fun crafting with Alexandra. Enjoy!
In this part of the tutorial, we will start to work on the journal that will go into our journal station. And our first journal in the series is the butterfly themed journal. The journal will have 2 signatures only, but it will have lots of pockets and flaps. I have already started to build the signatures, and I built them the way I usually do it. I mix one printed sheet with one tea-dyed sheet of paper. You're welcome to use more papers and the variety that you want to see in your journal, but in my journal that's what I chose to do. So there are 2 signatures, as I mentioned, and each one of the signatures has 6 8.5 by 11 double-sided printed pages, as well as 6 folded tea-dyed pages of the same size. Each signature has 12 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. I want to get to the binding straight away. I have a piece of quite thin cardstock here, and it's just plain white. It doesn't matter what you have because you will be covering it with fabric. For the purposes of this tutorial, I chose white because I'm going to use the cotton fabric of the ivory color, and it is quite translucent, as you can see, so I thought white will be best for me to use today. And the piece of paper that I have here measures 3 1/8 by 8.5. I scored 2 score lines which are 7/8 of an inch away from the left and the right hand side of this paper on the short side. And I also added score lines between the first 2 at every 1/8 of an inch, just to make sure that I can curve the spine of my book easier. And that's what we have here. So in the back of this piece, I already sketched a few guidelines and also marked the places for future holes that I will use for sewing my signatures to the binding. So the guidelines are at 1/2 inch, 2 3/8, 4 1/4, 6 1/8, and 8 inches. And then I have also marked the places for the future holes that we will use for binding our signatures onto. And those holes will be, if you will look at all the score lines that you have on this paper piece, there will be 12 of them. So my holes will be along the 5th score line here, at 1/2 inch, 2 3/8, and so on, and along the 8th score line. Let's poke the holes through. That's what we have in the front. Now, the front of this cardstock piece is going to be covered with a piece of fabric. And I took a piece of fabric which is a little bit longer than 8.5 inches, which is the height of my binding piece. And it's a little bit narrower than the width of the paper. What I'm going to do next is I will roughly mark where the fabric ends on paper, and then I will use my glue stick and I will apply glue to the paper up to those pencil lines, attach my fabric on top, flip it to the back, repoke the holes again so that they're visible in the front. As soon as I have my holes repoked, I will take this piece to my ironing board and I will iron on top of the fabric on this side, just to make sure that the glue bonds all the layers faster. And once I have that done, I will get back to the same piece. I will flip it to the back side and I will use another piece of fabric to glue down in the back. We'll reinforce our binding. Now I am ready to glue these parts of fabric down. Taking this to iron. Now I will just take it to my sewing machine and add a line of stitching at the top and at the bottom. Here it is. I once again repoked the holes so that they are visible both in the back and in the front. And the next thing that I want to do, and it's optional depending on the look of the journal that you want to achieve, but I'm going to distress the edges here at the top and the bottom, and also maybe add a little bit of ink here onto this part of the fabric, and maybe even you want to add some stamping, add more stitching if you'd like. So all of that is optional. I decided to go with some stenciling, and that's the stencil that I used. This specific one is from La La Land Crafts. We will take our signatures. I just want to make sure that they're folded nicely and that they all stay together. I'm going to use my paper clips, and then I will use my punching cradle and the template with the pre-poked holes. Now the holes in this template are in the same places where they were on the binding piece. Okay, and the template is the same height as the binding. So here is the top of my template, and I'm just making sure that I positioned the pages the right way in the punching cradle. And now I'm just going to poke the holes. And now I'm ready to bind my signatures. Now both of our signatures are attached to the binding, and we can keep on working on our cover. For the cover, we're going to need 2 pieces of medium weight chipboard, and they both will measure 8 3/4 by 6 inches. And I have already attached them to a piece of rather thin cardstock. And the cardstock piece measures 2 3/8 by 8 3/4. And the distance between the first score line on the right and first score line on the left of this cardstock piece is 1/2 inch. I also added the score lines at every 1/8 of an inch between the score lines on the sides, and that again is just to make sure that we have a nicely curved spine. I'm going to use fabric for wrapping my cover. My piece of fabric is just large enough to cover the chipboard and the paper, and also I added about maybe 1 inch on all 4 sides for the flaps. The base of my cover is complete. You can see just a little bit of distress ink on the edges. Now I will cover the fabric with the paper layer like so, and I have already chosen 2 of these patterns from the paper collection that I'm working with from Victoria Designs. You can again find all the details in the description box down below. So both of the paper pieces that I have here measure 5 7/8 by 8 5/8, and I am going to use again the glue stick for gluing them down to fabric, because I plan to stitch them along the 4 sides of those papers. And if you're not going to do the stitching, then by all means use a stronger glue for adhering these to the fabric. If you're not going to stitch, this is how your cover will look like at this point. And if you are going to stitch, it will look like this. Now, when you stitch, first of all, you will stitch a line here, pull the threads to the back, and then stitch from this corner like so, and get back to the bottom corner here. Then again, pull the threads to the back and tie the knots and secure the threads with a piece of tape, and do the same on the back of the cover. First stitch only 1 row here, and then the same way stitch like so and secure your threads in the back. And that's how your cover will look now. Next, I already had the guidelines here to the left and the right side of the spine, but the guidelines are 7/8 of an inch away from the edge of the chipboard, and that's what will help us to align the signatures and glue them down to the cover. We will only have to pay attention that we have equal distance from the edge of the binding to the edge of the cover, and that will be around 1/8 of an inch, something like that. Now, before I glue them in, I want to add more details to the outside of the spine here, and I have prepared a few pieces of leather, and these are 2 1/4 of an inch long by, well, 2 wider ones are 1 inch wide, and the smaller one is 3/4 of an inch wide. So I want to add them. Oh, and yeah, and to one of the pieces I have already stitched with a zigzag stitch butterfly. The butterfly came from the collection from one of the faux postage stamps. So I just trimmed around the butterfly. I'm going to glue the leather pieces to the cover, both to the fabric part and to the parts with the paper. I really like the look that the brads add to the journals. I am going to use brads for additionally securing the leather pieces on my covers. I also want to attach this paper tassel that I created with the leftovers from the paper collection that I am working with today. Now we are ready to attach our signatures to the cover. Okay, so I removed the paper clips, and this is how the spine looks from the top and from the bottom. We are going now to add our flaps and pockets to the inside of the front and our back cover. And we will start with adding our pieces to the front cover. So I have made my homework, so to say, and I have prepared the layers, and I'm going to tell you all about it now. So let's see what we have. Okay, first of all, we have a piece of craft cardstock, and I think I showed this before when we created the stand for the journals, but in case you missed it, that's the paper that I'm working with today. This piece measures 10 inches long by 5.5 inches wide, and it is scored at 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch from both the left and the right side. And then there is a line, a diagonal line here that you see on the cardstock. We will use this line to cut the paper piece into 2 halves. So I have the first mark for that diagonal line to be sketched at 4 inches away from this corner of the cardstock, from this very corner, not from the score lines, but from the corner itself, 4 inches in. And on this side, the mark is at 6 inches away from the corner of the cardstock. Okay, so if you flip the paper, then this mark here will be 4 inches away from this corner. Okay, but if you don't want to rotate your paper piece all the time, then one at the bottom will be 4 inches away, and one at the top will be 6 inches away from the corner. So now you will go ahead and cut right along the guideline. You will cut your paper and you will get this. We, of course, want to mat these flaps. And for that, I am going to use a piece of pattern paper. That's the paper that I chose from the collection. So the paper measures 8 1/8 by 5 3/8. And let me show this to you again. So I flip it like that. Okay, I flip it like that, and I again will have to draw a guideline. So the bottom mark for that guideline will be at 3 1/8 of an inch from the corner of the paper. And again, let me show the direction of the print to you. Okay, and then the second mark will be at 5 inches away from this corner, or again, if I rotate that, it will be at 3 1/8 of an inch, 3 1/8 of an inch from this corner of the cardstock. Okay, so once again, I will cut along the guideline, and this is what we will have. We are now going to mat our diagonal flaps with the pattern paper on the front. Don't glue anything to the back of these flaps just yet. So let me glue the papers down to the craft base and get back to you. Okay, so here are both of the flaps. Now I want to add a string closure to these, and I want to add 4 circles that will hold the string. I already have the circles here, and these are double layered, and they measure 3/4 of an inch in diameter. I poked the holes in their centers, and now we just want to see where exactly we want to have them. I think I will just eyeball the placement of these. I think something like that. Since I already have the holes poked in the circles, I am going to use my pencil and just see where I need to poke the holes in the paper. Okay, so I have attached them here, and you know, nothing fancy. I flattened the brads all the way. I didn't leave any space for the thread to go between the circle and the paper, and that's because I plan to use a really thin string for this purpose. If you plan to use a thicker string, then maybe, I know that Tina usually like slides a piece of medium weight chipboard for the added thickness between the circle and the paper, just to make sure that there is enough room in there for the string to go in between. Okay, so I am still eyeballing the placement for these guys here as well. Now I can again just poke the hole and add the circles. I will add the string a little bit later, and I will continue to the rest of the layers now. Okay, so 2 of these guys are ready, and we can now take the second paper that we have prepared for matting the back. Okay, so my paper measures 8 1/8 again by 5 3/8, and again the mark for starting the guideline is at 3 1/8 of an inch from that corner. Now, as it will go down, I'm going to cut along the line, and glue the papers down to the flaps. And it's done. Okay, so here are our flaps. We will put them aside for now. I have also prepared a piece of paper that we're going to use here. This paper piece measures 8.5 by 5 7/8. And as you can see, I have prepared a few more elements. So this flip out was cut from the paper. You will definitely find the designer sheet that had this picture on. And I also created a pocket. So the piece for the pocket measures 4 by 5.5. The flap is glued and then stitched onto the side of this pocket. And I have also added a clear pocket at the bottom of this pocket. Pockets over pockets over pockets, right? But that's what makes the book fun to flip through. So yeah, again, this acetate part of the pocket is also stitched to the main pocket, and the edge that you see here, so I added a little bit of foiled washi tape, and that's the washi tape that I had. It's from Scotch Expressions washi tape. That's what is said here, nothing else as for like item number or anything. So I folded the washi tape over one edge of the acetate, and then since the washi tape is not very tacky, I didn't have any problem of adding a zigzag stitch line on top of that. So I added the washi tape and stitched on one edge of the acetate first. Then I clipped the acetate to the paper and stitched around the edge of the pocket, both through the acetate and the paper. I also added this flap. Now I am going to glue the pocket in just a few places, you know, just to make sure that it stays. So I will glue it down to my main paper piece. So we have the pocket lightly attached to our paper layer. Now next, before we continue, I just want to know that I haven't forgotten this. I took that thin string that I will use for my closures, and I also made a mark here. You can see the horizontal line. It is 4 3/8 of an inch away from the top and the bottom of my cover. It is about 11 centimeters away. So I'm going to glue the string here, and I want to keep on working on the pockets that we will have attached to the central cardstock piece here. So one pocket will flip to the right and another pocket will flip to the left. For the pockets, they're both the same size. So for the pockets, what I did here is this. First of all, I printed twice the pattern paper which had this design, and the only difference between them is that one is printed on white cardstock and the second one is printed on ivory. So just don't mind that. That's me. I use different papers, but the size of this paper piece after I trimmed it is 5 3/4 by 4 1/8. And then I glued the craft hinge to the paper piece. The hinge measures 1 1/8 by 4 1/8. And it is scored at 1/2 inch and 5/8 of an inch on the short side. And I did this for both this layer of paper and for this paper. Okay, so the measurements are the same, and I have attached a hinge to the left hand side of the paper piece for the pocket that will flip to the right, and on the right hand side of the paper that I'm going to use for the pocket that will flip to the left. Okay, now I am going to mat the back, of course, with another layer of paper, and that's the pattern that I chose for it. The measurement for this layer is here, 4 1/8 by 5 3/4. So it will cover this paper like so, and we'll get right to the fold. And we will do the same for this flap. Again, we have the measurements, the same measurements for the paper piece here. And I can already, as a matter of fact, go ahead and glue the paper down. Now, when you glue the paper down, you can start from the side with the fold, okay, and try not to overlap the fold line. Start to glue your paper right after the fold, like so. And then if you have a little overhanging on this outer side, you can always trim it off. So I'm going to glue these paper layers to my flaps right now. And once you have that done, you're going to take 2 pieces of acetate. Each one will be 2.5 inches by 4 1/8. And again, as I explained before, I have folded a piece of washi tape over one edge and added the line of zigzag stitching. So now I am going to get a paper clip and attach the piece of acetate to the paper. When I attach that to the paper, I make sure that I align the edges of both the pattern paper and the acetate right here before the fold. And I will now take this to my sewing machine, and I will stitch around the edge like so on both of the pieces and get back to you. Okay, so here we are. We have this stitched, and here are our pockets here in the back of each one of the flaps, and we are ready to glue them down to this paper layer. Now, the way I'm going to glue them down is this. And by the way, guys, even if I give you the measurements in the tutorial, always before you glue something down, try it on. Try and see how it looks. Maybe something does need to be trimmed. These flaps will be glued down to the back of our large paper piece, like so. And you will see that they will have to be glued down a little bit lower than the very corner of the paper. Okay, so I am going to apply now some glue to the flap right here up to the score line, and then I will glue this to my a larger paper piece, maybe about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Okay, like so. That's where the flap will be. And I will then do the same at the bottom with the bottom pocket, and I will just decide where is the best place for it to be glued down to by aligning the top edge of this pocket with the bottom edge of the pocket, which has already been glued down. So we have now this weird construction going on, and I will now take this whole piece to my sewing machine, and I will sew around the edges of the large paper piece like so, making sure that I also attach with the line of stitching the pocket to the base paper. Okay, so this is now stitched all around. Next, I want to add one more flap before we glue everything down. And for this flap, here is the paper that I chose. The paper measures 8.5 by 6.25, and here on the short side it is scored at 5.5 and 5.75. You can also see that I distressed the part of the paper that will be seen in the fold. I have another layer of paper, and this time it measures 5 7/16 by 8.5. And the weird measurement comes from the fact that I want the paper to get only to the fold. But once again, you can cut it to the same size as the section right here, and then start to glue the paper down from the fold and trim the excess tiny piece on this side once it's already glued down. If you don't want to trim anything, then these are your measurements. So I am going to add a window here, and for creating the window I will use an oval die, or any shape of a die, as a matter of fact, depending on what's the shape of the window that you want to have. You might want to make it square, that's also fine, but I want to make an oval window. And for making that, I am going first of all to secure my inside paper layer on top of the outside paper layer by adding really tiny drops of glue and then attaching both of the pieces together like so. Now I am going to choose my shape for the window. And I know there are so many shapes of the dies out there, but somehow I always get to the plain shapes like ovals and circles and even squares. So I am going now to take this to my die cutting machine and run both layers of the paper, which are glued down together only in the corners, and the die. I will run this through my die cutting machine and get back to you. Let's take out the ovals that we die cut, and these are perfectly aligned. We're going to distress the edge of our window, both in the front and on the inside as well. Now we are going to add a piece of acetate between the paper layers. So let me just sandwich it in between so that you can understand what I'm talking about. And I will also, you remember that string that we left here on the cover? So we will have another string closure on this flap here, and for adding the circle for our closure, I just need to determine where the center on this page is, and it is at 1 1/4. As a matter of fact, this is something that I needed to mention before, because you might have chosen another shape of the opening. So you just need to make sure that it takes the top section of the page up to the 4 1/4, because you will add your closure right here, your circle for the string closure. Okay, so first of all, I want to add a little border around the window on both sides of my frame. If you want to go really far, you can even make this into a shaker, or maybe add 2 layers of acetate and sandwich some dried flowers between those two. But I'm going to have just a plain see-through window here. So before I glue everything down, I need to poke a hole in the place where I marked and add my circle for the future string closure. Now I am going to add some glue around the opening on the paper layer, which will be on the inside of the flap, and I will add my acetate in there. Okay, now I am going to add glue to all of this paper up to the fold line, and I'm not adding too much glue because I will sew around on this page. So I just need to make sure that I have enough glue around the opening, around the window, to make sure that the acetate is attached nicely there. Okay, so here we go. Now I'm gonna take this to my sewing machine and stitch around the edges. Oh yeah, and by the way, I wanted to round the corners here, just for some fun. Okay, so like that. Now I'm going to stitch. Okay, it has been stitched all around. Now let's get back to our page. This flap will be glued down to our central paper piece on the left hand side, like so. And before you glue it down, you can miter the corners of this flap like this up to the score line. And I'm going to add some glue and glue all of this to the flap like so. Burnish. Okay, and we also have our flaps from the very beginning, and we will add them to the top and the bottom of this page here. And you will notice that they're a little bit narrower than the base paper layer. It has been done on purpose. So when you glue them down, just make sure that you leave equal space from the left and the right hand side. and make sure that you are gluing down the correct piece to the top in terms of the pattern. This flap will go at the bottom, and if you really want to know where the bottom flap should be, or vice versa, the top, depending from which one you started gluing everything down, you can take your ruler and measure. So in my case, the corner of the flap should be at 5 3/4 of an inch. So I can just make a mark here in the back of my paper piece, and I can now go ahead and glue everything down. Now when you glue these flaps down, it's very important not to overlap the fold line, not to glue it too much in, because otherwise they will not close properly. Okay, so I am attaching this, and I'm making sure that my fold starts after the corner of the base paper. Okay, now I can just lay it flat on the desk and burnish. Okay, now let's see how it works. Yeah, the flaps close nicely, and this is how our flaps and pockets look that can now be glued down to the inside of the front cover. So use a good amount of glue that you usually use and just glue everything down to the inside of the front cover. And you are going to have just a little border around the 3 outer edges. Okay, I glued my paper down. Now I can fold the flaps in and use the string to keep the flap closed here, and I need to add another string to keep these flaps closed as well. So I have here a piece which is maybe 20 inches, and I'm just going to wind it around one of the circles like so. And again, this is a very thin string, so I'm just going to wind it around and tie 2 knots like so. Okay, then I can trim the excess string here, and we're going to wind this string around our circles. It might be more difficult the first time you do it, but the more you wind and unwind, it will get better and better. Okay, so that's our flap on the inside of the front cover, and you might need to shape the spine of your book just a little bit so that it accommodates the flaps. And we're going to add more to the back of our cover as well. Okay, and you can see that I am shaping the cover and the spine right now. Okay, it is flexible, everything is attached nicely, so there is no problem with doing that. And eventually our spine will be 1 3/8 of an inch. I wouldn't recommend to heavily embellish the journaling pages, because as you can see, the spine will already be quite tight. but I thought that it will not be a problem since, first of all, the pages look gorgeous as they are. They are embellished digitally to perfection, and you have a lot of space for writing. I mean, this is what our book is for. And all the flaps and all the fun and all the interesting elements will be on the covers. So that's why I thought that it's not that much of a problem that we don't have a lot of embellishments on the inside. I have here a few elements that I want to add on the pockets. I have these butterflies that I'm going to glue down here, and these ones that I'm going to glue down on the acetate pocket there at the top. And I might have a little bit of the leaves overhanging from the edge of the pocket, but I'm absolutely fine with that. I also have more cut out embellishments right here, and I'm going to use them on the flaps at the top and maybe one at the bottom. And there are so many ephemera pieces that come with this collection. I'm sure you will have loads of fun. I have just started to embellish the pockets and the pages. I'm sure I will add more, but just for now, to give you an idea, here are some large journaling cards that can go to this pocket here. And I have also added a few tags to the pocket here at the top, and I have also added a card to this pocket here, and we can add something to the pocket here. And on this page I created for now a belly band that can hold a small tag or a small card. And yeah, that's the beginning of the embellishing process. Here I have glued down my butterflies as well. Now we will work on the flaps that are going to be attached to the inside of the back cover of our journal. And I would like to begin with the piece that will be attached straight to the cover. I have prepared a few pieces here. So these are the ephemera cards from the paper collection. I will get back to them later. And here I have a pattern paper which was cut from one of the designs in the collection, and it measures 8.5 by 5 7/8. I cut it on the sides. I trimmed the sides so that this frame with the butterflies is in the center of the sheet. And I have a piece of acetate, and I wanted to mention that I'm using a really thin acetate. This piece is the same width as the paper, which means it's 5 7/8, and the width in my case is 2 inches wide, but you can make it even wider. It will be a belly band, and if you want to have it wider, then by all means go for it. I once again have used the foiled washi tape, and this time I attached it to both edges of the acetate. So I'm going to position it somewhere in the middle of the page and make sure that I use at least one paper clip to hold it in place, just like so. Now I'm going to take it to my sewing machine, just as usual, and I'm going to stitch around the perimeter of this page and get back. Okay, here we go. I secured the threads in the back with just a little piece of painter's tape. And I really like the fact that we can stitch on acetate and not to use glue. When we have our belly band, the cards will go behind the belly band like so. And since I'm already working on this page, I think I will add the cutout of these butterflies and the flourish from the paper collection right onto the belly band. Okay, now I will set this aside for now, and I will get to the next part of the project, which is creating an additional flip out page. This is the flap that will be attached to our base paper piece and will flip out to the right. So the paper piece that I have here, that's the pattern that I chose, and I already glued down one of the pockets with a curved edge, and this pocket was also part of the ephemera collection, which accompanied the butterflies collection in general. So this paper piece measures 6 inches by 8 3/8, and on the short side I scored it at 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch. As you can see, I distressed the visible part of the fold, and I'm going to cover it next with another piece of paper. I chose this pattern with the butterflies. The paper measures 5 3/16 by 8 3/8, and again the weird measurement comes from the fact that I do not want to overlap the fold here on this side, and I need my paper to get right to the edge of the paper underneath. If you don't want to deal with the weird measurements, you can cut this paper piece a little bit wider or the same as the section on this paper up to the first score line, and then when you glue the page down, just make sure that you trim the axis so that they're both the same. So I will glue this paper down to this one back to back. Here we go. And then I have a piece of acetate that I'm going to use for the pocket. The acetate is the same length as the paper here, the paper flap, which is 8 3/8 inch. And the width, again, is something that you can determine according to what you need or what you want to have on this page. In my case, it's 2.5 inches wide. So again, I am going to clip the acetate to the page with a paper clip, and then go ahead and sew around the whole page and get back. And here we go. I have added the stitching, and the cards will be placed in this pocket. Then onto the front of the pocket, I want to add this cut out embellishment with the butterflies and probably the rosemary. Okay, so here we go. And I am using, I think I mentioned before, the art glitter glue for gluing down my paper embellishments onto the acetate. I think that what would also be perfect for this is the Xyron sticker maker. So if any of you have the Xyron sticker station, or what's the correct name of it. I think it would be great to use it for this purpose. Okay, so here is my pocket, and I'm going now to glue this flap to the base paper layer. And I also have this rose that I planned to add in there, so I'm gonna do that now, and then glue my flip out page to the central section of the page. I think I'm gonna miter the corners just a little bit, and you will see that this paper layer is just a little bit shorter than this one. So I'm going to keep that in mind when gluing both of them together. Make sure that you do not overlap the fold when you glue your pages together, because we want the flip out page to freely close. Okay, just like so. That's what we have for now. Next we will work on the flap that will be on the left hand side, and for that flap I also prepared a few elements already so that we can just move on with our tutorial. So let me explain to you what I have here. These are, first of all, more journaling cards from the paper collection. Then the pocket, the curved pocket that I glued onto the pattern paper layer, is also from the paper collection. That's exactly how it comes. I just cut it out and distressed the edges, folded the flaps in, and glued it down onto my paper flap. Now, the base of the flap measures 8 3/8 by 5 3/8, and then on the short side I scored it at 4 3/4 of an inch and at 4 7/8. I am going to cover this blank part of the paper on this side with an additional pattern paper, which measures 4 11/16 by 8 3/8. But before I glue both of the pieces together, I want to add a pocket onto this paper layer. For making a pocket, I just used a cut off from one of the pattern sheets with these butterflies and glued it down to the craft cardstock base. So the craft cardstock base here measures 3 inches by 4.5, and the pattern paper piece measures 2 7/8 by 4 3/8. And as you can see, I added the stitching along the edges of the pocket that will not be accessible once I glue the pocket to the paper layer. So I want to secure it on the paper just a little bit on the right side. Now I am going to glue all of this paper piece onto the flap and onto my page here, and then I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and sew all the way around, stitching the pocket onto the whole page and adding that missing stitching on these sides, as well as adding more interest to the whole page with the stitching, and get back. So this is how it looks. And I actually forgot to mention, between I glued the pages together and stitched around them, you could have seen the hinge with this envelope. So for making the envelope, first of all, I used my envelope punch board. The envelope measures 4¼ by 3¼ and I used the measurements for creating the envelope that will match the 3x4" card size. So my base piece of craft cardstock measured 6x6", and then I just followed the directions for creating the envelope using the punch board. Once the envelope was created and I assembled it completely, I trimmed just a tiny bit of the envelope on the side right here and put the additional paper piece that serves as a hinge. So then I just glued the envelope to that hinge, and that's how it looks. For creating the frame here, I just used the images from one of the pattern sheets from the collection, and I cut all of that sheet of paper to separate images of the butterflies, and then I measured each image to see what needs to be the size of the frame that I will need for each one of them. For this envelope here, I used the largest image of the butterfly, stamped another butterfly on the back of the envelope, and added a few journaling cards to the inside of the envelope. And this label here also comes from the collection. We have this flap ready, and we can, the same way as we did with this one, we can miter the corners up to the score line here, up to the fold. We can apply some glue to the flap and glue this flap down to our central cardstock piece. Now I'm going to add my journaling cards to this pocket here. This is how it looks so far. I really love it. It looks gorgeous. We can add more cards and little tags to this pocket here. I have 2 pieces of paper, and the base pieces of craft cardstock measure 5½ inches wide by 5 inches tall. On the short side, if you put it like that in your scoreboard, you have to score at 4¼ and at 4½, and you will do this the same for both of the pieces because they measure the same. And then for the front of these flaps, I have chosen the pattern with the butterflies. Paper layers that you see here measure 4 inches by 5¼ Of course, you cannot ignore the shape that I already have sketched in the back of these paper pieces. For creating the shapes, I have used a protractor. That's the one that I have. And as a matter of fact, the openings that I'm going to create here are inspired by Ruth from the channel Journal Yours. I want to cut out the windows in the shape of this opening that a protractor had. And for deciding where the shape should be cut out, I found the center of my pattern paper piece. If the whole paper is 5¼ inch wide, then the center was at 2 5/8. So I made a guideline, a vertical guideline on both of the pieces. And then the horizontal line is at 2 1/4 inches away from the side with the straight corners on both of the pieces. And for a reason, I decided to round the corners here so that we don't make any mistakes. It will be way easier to understand how to position the pieces and where to draw our shape. If we have the rounded corners there, you will just have to align the middle edge of the protractor with the horizontal line that you have created before, and then you will just trace the shape which is on the inside like that. And as a matter of fact, I will not only trace the shape but already go ahead and cut it out. And I will now go ahead and glue the pattern paper piece onto the craft cardstock, making sure that I leave even borders all around. The glue will be applied to the whole area of this paper layer. Now let's put that aside and do the same on this paper piece. Now that we have that done, comes a little bit tricky part. So first of all, for the back of these flaps, I have cut the paper pieces which measure exactly the same as the ones with the butterflies, and they're both 4 inches by 5 1/4. I have also rounded the corners, and I suggest that on this side of the flaps you use the paper which doesn't have a certain direction or a pattern, because again it will be easier to do it that way. Now I'm going to apply just tiny drops of glue to the straight corners of this paper piece, and I will make sure that I center it on the craft cardstock and glue it down only there where I added the glue drops. I will do the same on this piece. Now I will take any of the flaps. I will put the protractor on top of the paper so that the shape matches the shape that we have already cut out before in the pattern paper. And I will now just make sure that I cut and press on the craft knife enough to cut through both the craft cardstock layer and the layer of the pattern paper that I have in the back. Okay, this is what we have now, and I will do the same on the second flap. Let's distress the inside of the opening, both in the front and in the back of each one of those flaps. This paper is still not glued down in the back, just want to stress that out. So we will of course again use some pieces of thin acetate to sandwich between the pattern paper and the craft cardstock. The same way as we did before, I can go ahead and add some glue close to the opening itself, and then add the acetate in there. We can do the same on this flap here. Now I'm going to add the glue to this layer of pattern paper, and I will once again just not worry about adding not enough really, because I'm going to take this to my sewing machine again and stitch both around the openings and around the edges of the patterned paper pieces. So the stitching will go around the opening here and then around the pattern paper. One more thing, I was carried away with gluing everything down, and as a matter of fact, I forgot that I want to have here the string closure. So we need to attach our circles before we seal this paper layer and glue it down to the craft cardstock. So I will have to find a way to cover the tails of the breads here on this flap, but let me show you on the example of this flap how to do it correctly. Our flaps are 5.5 inches wide. That means that the center is at 2 3/4. Let me just mark the place for poking the hole, and we'll poke it through. I'm poking through the pattern paper in the front and the craft cardstock. Now I can attach my circle. Now I can go ahead and glue this paper piece. So you would do the same steps for both of the flaps. My stitching on the curves didn't turn out perfect, but I still like the looks of it. I think that stitching in general adds a lot of beauty to any work, so I keep on doing the stitching. Okay, we are ready now to attach the flaps, and once again, just don't forget about the direction of the paper, and check out which flap needs to go to the top and which one to the bottom. So I am going to attach the flap at the top first. Try to center it on to the main page, making sure that the flap goes above the outer edge of the paper here. And that's because we just want to make sure that once everything is folded in, this flap can freely close on top of everything. Now I will flip it back to how it was, and I will take my second flap, again apply the glue, and either eyeball or measure where you have to glue this flap down. Again, just make sure that the fold of the flap goes right along the edge of the paper. Okay, and I think it worked fine. So we can later on add the string closure, and right now we can add maybe a journaling card in here and one in here. Okay, and we are ready to glue all of these flaps and pages as one piece to the inside of our back cover. I will do that now and get back to you. What's left is to embellish our front cover of the book, and it will be ready to go into the compartment which is dedicated for it in the journal station. Here's a quick look at how I decorated the cover. I have added a layer of foiled cardstock and used my dies to cut out a circle. Then I layered another piece of pattern paper on top of the foiled one, stitched both of them together, glued them down to the cover, and then just added more from the ephemera pieces from the collection. There are so many beautiful images. I'm sure you will enjoy cutting them out and using them not only in this project but also in many others. I really like how all of it turned out. I also added beads to the tassel here, something that I didn't show you previously in the tutorial. You know, all those second thoughts when you think that you are done with the project and you keep on looking at it and you're like, oh, I will add a thing here and I will add something else there. So this is how the look of the spine changed a little bit too. And I added some script stamping on the fabric. And also I have cut out a few of the roses from the paper collection and glued them down in various places on the spine. And I also had to take off the butterfly and add a piece of faux leather here, in which I die cut the number 1, because this is our first out of 4 books that will house our junk journal station. And here it is. Let me just try to zoom you out a little bit. Maybe this will be a little bit better. So yeah, our drawers are ready. And here are 2 of the compartments that will also hold journals in the future. And our journal from this tutorial is ready to go into this compartment here. So that's all for me today. I hope you like that tutorial and you will enjoy following along and creating either the station or the journal or even both. I will see you back soon and we will work on the second book in the series, and I can already reveal to you that it will be a bird-themed one. So stay tuned and thanks for watching. Bye!